Welcome to the Sharkpreneur podcast with Kevin Harrington and Seth Greene. Kevin Harrington is the inventor of the infomercial, one of the original sharks from the hit TV show Shark Tank, and has generated over $5 billion in TV and digital direct response sales. Seth Greene is the world's first trusted authority on cutting-edge direct response marketing, a best-selling author, and the only 3-time Marketer of the Year nominee. On the podcast, Kevin and Seth interview Sharkpreneurs who share straight talk on what it takes to explode your business.
Why do so many businesses struggle while others seem to explode overnight? Do you wish you had the secret to this type of exponential growth? Now, I've scaled more than 20 businesses to over $100 million, and it's not just luck. In my new book with Mark Tim, Mentor to Millions, you'll learn the repeatable framework I use in all my business ventures for massive success. Order at kevinmentor.com and get over $1,000 in bonuses. Head to kevinmentor.com.
Welcome to the podcast. This is your host, Seth Greene. Today, I have the good fortune to be joined by my friend, Tom Ross. Tom is a master practitioner of the Advanced Rapid Enlightenment Process developed by our friend, Matthew Ferry, who is co-founder of the Center for Rapid Enlightenment. Tom teaches the principles of defiant spirituality and practical mysticism to students around the world. He donates his time and practice of assisted karmic rebalancing to veterans suffering from PTSD. He's also a mortgage industry veteran, currently leading a top producing team specializing in residential loan origination. He's also an avid climber and lives in Phoenix with his wife and kids. Tom, thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Seth.
Of course. So we're going to go back in time just a little bit.
Please.
And we're going to talk about first, we're going to go to the old life and then the transformation. So talk a little bit about how you got into the mortgage industry and how you grew to the success that you have been in that industry.
So I got into the mortgage industry in 1998, and I've seen all the different market cycles over my 25 years coming up now in the industry. And it is essentially, it was by accident. It was something it was my first job essentially out of college. I happened to be really good at it. Started a company, had a company with a few different friends, lost that company, set up another company to prove that I wasn't a failure. And then eventually along the way grew into a top producer that had a considerable amount of people and responsibility underneath them. Now, interestingly, we read the bio in the beginning, and I've got to confess, I have to update that bio because through my career of top production, I wound up taking a sabbatical year in 2022. I literally, wanted to take a year to discover a little bit more about myself and what I wanted out of my life. When I came back, I actually dissolved the entire team, the entire structure, and relaunched a independent mortgage brokerage, just myself as a solopreneur on that side. And I did that honestly in favor of being able to kind of express this spiritual teacher healer part of me and be able to do it in a way that didn't require me to be concerned about what other people were doing all the time and how to move them.
It sounds like, I'm sure the longer version is going to be in the book, that you've undergone a profound transformation and were able to, like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly, shed your old skin to evolve and serve at a higher level. Am I summarizing that correct?
Yeah. The bullet points are: in 2017, my mind went stone quiet after doing rapid enlightenment process work and an advanced rapid enlightenment process work with our friend Matthew Ferry. When that happened, you might term it kind of a bit of a spiritual awakening. I also started experiencing in other people the things that were disrupting them, karmically. This is all karma work. In 2019, I started living a double life, Seth, where on one hand, I was this top producing mortgage guy. On the other hand, I was like this teacher healer guy doing trauma release work with people who are suffering from post-traumatic stress. And so this entire process has been essentially me, to your analogy, in the cocoon, figuring out who and what I am, and then ultimately emerging as this whole other thing. Was once just a mortgage guy, now moving into to teacher healer capacity on the other hand.
Okay, so let's go into that because that's obviously what you're doing now. How did you find Matt and the Advanced and the Center for Rapid Enlightenment in the first place?
So I first was exposed to Matthew back in my old real estate training. He once upon a time was a master coach and a monster real estate trainer in the industry. And I was a mortgage guy. And I figured, I'm like, hey, if I'm going to get coaching in my mortgage career, why not sit in a room full of prospects, i.e. sit with a bunch of realtors? And just through that company, I happened to get exposed to Matthew. I went through an NLP program that he put on for about a year and a half. It was extraordinary from a mindset standpoint. And I tell you what, Matthew, the spiritual teacher, I got an email probably about 8 years ago or so that said that he had a mastermind that he was putting on. And I'm like, oh, I remember Matthew from back in my training days. There's something interesting about that. And I took a flyer on this mastermind, and through that process became exposed to the Rapid Enlightenment process, and then ultimately evolved into where we are now.
Okay, so talk a little bit about what the Rapid Enlightenment process is, because I'm sure most of our viewers and listeners probably haven't heard of it.
Yeah, so the Rapid Enlightenment process, as defined by Matthew, is a series of contextual shifts, like ways that like shift your thinking about the world, that when you adopt the different contexts, like there's an immediate change in a higher degree of peace, calm, flow that you're into. And so some of these concepts could be something like that you are a soul, and the soul that you are is infinite. Now, it's one thing to say that, it's one thing to intellectualize around that. Maybe you have a belief structure on that, maybe you don't. However, having a subjective experience of yourself as something outside of this sack of meat, that we're essentially piloting around, produces a different experience of life. And there's a whole series of contextual shifts that occur. Another component to the Rapid Enlightenment process is really understanding what your mind is. Recognizing the survival mechanism that your mind is. Matthew calls it the drunk monkey, and the unconscious reflexes. So I have this hallucination that I'm running around living my life like I'm intentional with it and I'm controlling my thinking. And the reality is most of the things that you think, that you feel, that you react to are essentially just like unconsciously programmed. They're occurring without your awareness, and then essentially you're responding to them in the environment. And then lastly is really kind of healing the soul and making peace with the most fundamental survival aspects of consciousness, which are what we call in the Center for Rapid Enlightenment the hidden motives to survive. So things that you've heard before in various religious backgrounds, but maybe some of you haven't. Things like greed and grudge and hatred and humble and victim. The need to hide yourself, traitor, illogical rules, pride, resistance, lazy, like these kind of like archetypal things. Well, they're legitimately survival functions. They show up in life. And we are, and when you identify them, you identify them where they're showing up, and you start releasing them in your life. When you combine all those things together, it produces an extraordinary state of calm and flow and peace with the people who take that work on.
And we all want calm and flow and peace for sure. What is defiant spirituality?
So defiant spirituality is what I call essentially the soul, like what the soul. So the soul that you are essentially has volition to express what it is. There are creative aspects, Seth, of human that are just they're unique to the soul you are. You may not be the only human that has them, but your combination of them make yours unique. So for me, the soul that I am, or something like teacher, is a creative aspect of the soul that I am. Monk or renunciate. I love being away from everybody and everything. Spiritual teacher is an aspect of that. Leader is an aspect of the soul that I am. Builder. I've been an entrepreneur, my entire life. Like these are aspects of just what my soul is, and it's essentially being what it is at all times. So when you think of defiant spirituality, it's not necessarily like I'm pushing against something. Think of it like you're looking out at the ocean, and there's this jutting piece of rock that's coming out, and the waves are crashing over it. And when the waves are all the way out, you can't even see the rock. And then the waves recede and the rock's still there. And then boom, the next wave comes in, and it comes out and the rock's still there. Defiant spirituality is essentially, it's like your soul is that rock. It is always there. It is always doing what it's doing. And it's almost like defying the elements around it that may hide it, may obscure it, may, if it's the weather, if it's the waves, whatever it happens to be, the defiant spirituality is the soul essentially being what it is at all times. And then the thing that we get to do as human beings in the process is like figure out what are the creative aspects of human that are my soul. What does my soul transmit? Everybody knows something about themselves, right? What are the other things? And then how do I align my life in such a way that I get to bring more of that into the world? Because when I align my life to express what I am at a soul level, things feel great. You feel more energized. You feel more gratitude. You feel more joy. And that's really kind of the juice.
How did your work with veterans start?
Work with veterans started with when I was talking about the trauma release work that I mentioned earlier. A lot of times, I basically just asked a couple of veterans when I was really scared and I didn't know what I was, I didn't know who I was or what I was doing. I just knew I had an ability to kind of like help people heal. And I went, hey, I've got a perspective about some of the stuff that you think or some of the stuff that you feel from post-traumatic stress, and I would describe the process. It's like, Seth, you and I are having this conversation, all right? And there's like 1,000 versions of me going that way, and there's 1,000 versions of you stretching behind you, and we're having this conversation, and something happens in the environment, and you and I may be okay talking here, but it's like 3 versions of me ago raises my hand and says, hey, I've got a problem with this. This reminds me of a time when, or the same thing happens on your side. So when the soul experiences 100% of itself at all times, however, it lacks the ability to disregard what isn't immediately relevant, like that's kind of the perspective with respect to releasing some post-traumatic stress. It's not necessarily about the event that occurred here and now. We're highly evolved and intellectual human beings that know that we should feel a certain way about a certain thing, or we know we should be able to get over it. But it's the different versions of us that have experienced a similar trauma or have had associated trauma in the past that I can go in and I can find that disrupted information. I can have them heal it in themselves, and then they experience a release of the symptoms. So it really just started because I have always had a soft spot for veterans. They were the people who I jumped in with and worked with earliest in my mortgage career. And I always found that they give so much, and you sign your name to that dotted line and you have no idea what the cost and the price is going to be. And I just really had a calling to be able to, to want to reach these people and be able to give back to them in some way, in a way that they're suffering, that they maybe haven't tried before.
You are doing some incredible work. What are some of the biggest misconceptions you think that exist around what you're doing?
One thing that came up was that it has to be, so the work that I do is I give people an experience of this phenomenon called karma. Like, what is it? It doesn't really exist in the West, right? So what is karma? What is the filter that it creates on the reality? How does it influence how I feel about life, how I experience life? And then ultimately I'll take them through a release process in the classes that I teach. And then they get to experience, I felt a certain way about a certain thing. Now I feel totally different. Like, what does that mean? Like, how do I apply that the rest of my life? And the one thing that came up recently that I think is really interesting is people were relating it to, is this a psychedelic thing? Are there, because that's a big thing in alternative medicine right now is MDMA, psilocybin, ayahuasca, DMT, you name it. There's a something for everybody. And that stuff is great. It's a fantastic way for some people to move it. That's not me. I'm not, my approach, my individual awakening, if it, as it were, is linear, is rational, is logical, deeply intuitive as well. The modality that we use in the Advanced Rapid Enlightenment Process is essentially utilizing muscle testing, which is applied kinesiology, as a way to help us not just discern, but really kind of like pierce our own denial mechanism to be able to figure out like what's the thing that's really going on. And it's linear, rational, it's intuitive. It doesn't require any kind of like altered states of consciousness. And I think personally, Seth, the place that I occupy in this space, I think that is being this mortgage guy with this background of like business. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, there's actually, there's a safe place to be extraordinarily spiritual, that I don't have to blow up my entire life, that I don't have to put myself in a completely altered state of consciousness and run the risks that come with that type of work. And I think that it is, I think that that's the biggest misconception, is that you can be extraordinarily spiritual, awakened, enlightened, name your adjective, and it doesn't have to come at the cost of a trip, if you will.
Your passion is obvious. What do you like best about what you're doing?
I love helping people. I love helping people, and I love teaching. I love watching people heal and release, some of the deepest and most significant traumas that have held them back in their life. I had a gentleman that I worked with, did some post-traumatic stress work with, who had experienced a stroke because of the amount of stuff that he had been dealing with, and the pressure that it created on him. And at the end of our work, and he recovered, like physically, he was fine. However, at the end of our work, he said, it's like it happened to somebody else. It's like, he had no attachment to whatever it was. It was like watching somebody else's story. And, being able to give people that kind of experience. And then for some of those who are interested in understanding, like, all right, well, how do I learn to do this? And then watching them be able to completely deepen their own and enrich their own life by learning some of these tools and techniques through the Center for Rapid Enlightenment. It really is, it's extraordinarily gratifying.
I bet. Talk a little bit about the Intentional Soul podcast.
So the Intentional Soul podcast is essentially, I'm my own avatar, right? So I am the Intentional Soul, and it's a podcast that's dedicated to finding and having conversations with people who are living intentionally. And maybe they went through a transformation similar to mine, where I was an A, now I'm a B. If it's a physician who's a carpenter, or a carpenter who's now an investment banker, if they're living intentionally and they're taking, and part of that process was they're taking risk in being able to move through either limiting belief patterns or adversity in some way. Like, I want to know you and talk to you, because because the podcast is about sharing the best strategies, practices, and tactics to be able to help the listeners get more out of the game called life.
That is absolutely beautiful. Well, we know your time's incredibly valuable. We greatly appreciate you spending some of it with us. For our folks who are watching and listening, where is the best place for them to go to learn more about you?
TomRossTalks.com is the URL, www.tomrosstalks.com. And you can always email me at tom@tomrosstalks.com.
All right. This has been Seth Greene with Tom Ross from Tom Ross Talks and the Intentional Soul podcast, which is coming soon. Stay tuned for more from Tom Ross and the Intentional Soul podcast. Thank you, everybody, for watching or listening. We will talk to you or see you next time.
Thanks, Seth.
Do you need money to fund your idea, product, or service? Are you ready to take your business to the next level but need capital to get it done? Kevin Harrington has heard more than 50,000 pitches and knows how to help you make the perfect pitch to get the funding for your entrepreneurial dream. He's distilled the process down in his perfect pitch cheat sheet, and it's yours for free. Just text PITCH to him right now at 727-888-2100. Text PITCH to 727-888-2100 right now and claim your free perfect pitch cheat sheet. Text PITCH to 727-888-2100 to start funding your dream today.
This show has been produced by Market Domination, LLC. To discover how you can have your own show completely done for you and turn it into a real published book and become the authority in your marketplace, go to www.marketdominationllc.com/podcast offer.